Well, you wrote 2 books just recently.
I did.
Yeah.
That was weird.
And I don't know how you did that because you're so busy, but you did one on communism and the history of violence, and also one on kind of the violence rising in America now.
Well,
the
they're connected.
assassination
They're absolutely connected. And we said that the violence we saw rising in America was a form of communist violence. And when we went through chapter and verse, and of course there's, I think, 2 chapters on the Chinese Communist Party, their completely abhorrent rise, their violence, their brutality, and how they, and this is key, by the way, that to the communists, violence is not an accident. Violence is not a symptom. It is a tactic. How Mao, and many communists before him, but really Mao more than I think almost any of them, used violence itself as a tactic. Really, I guess to put it in modern terms, you would call it a form of domestic terrorism, but against his own populace, to keep them in line and inculcating these groups of individual terrorist cells, we would call them the Red Guard today, and using that to really achieve his revolutionary goals, and particularly against enemies and class enemies within the society. And we explain that so this is the first book, Unhumans. It's called Unhumans, The Secret History of Communist Revolutions and How to Crush Them. And in that book, we describe how communism is a system of these violent tactics, many of which involve forms of state terrorism against specific population groups that have been designated as an enemy class. Yes. And we could see that happening in America today. Now, little did we know that just 2 weeks after the book was released, or actually 10 days after the book was released, that one of these types would try to kill Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's right.
And that happens, Butler, Pennsylvania, July 13th. The original book came out July 3rd. So 10 days later, we're doing the book tour. We're out there talking about communist violence. We say, hey, they're inculcating this violence. We go through and we tell the history of communist violence. We go to France, we go to Spain, we go to China, we go to Russia, of course. But then with Butler, we said, wait a minute. This is exactly what we've all been talking about. Then we saw another assassination attempt, and we said we have to write this out into a book so that we can explain to people that, unfortunately, what we predicted would happen has come to pass. The only thing that we didn't predict was that Donald Trump would be able to survive, not 1, but 2, and miraculously save these and survive these attempts, and go on to become a re-elected president of the United States by the hand of God, I believe. And it was only through divine intervention.
You know what I find very interesting is when it comes to some of the violence we've seen in the U.S. recently, people, and even on the left, are starting to point out that they believe it's being done by the ideologies they've been pushing. Even Mayor Eric Adams pointed to, Luigi Mangione shooting this CEO in New York and said that this type of thing he believes is being motivated by this anti-American ideology. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, so what it is the same type of communist violence that has always existed in these movements. It has been inculcated in Western society for years, by the way, and of course it goes back to its roots in Marxism and the various forms, Marxist-Leninism, Marxist-Leninist Maoism. But what it is communism, they will tell you that it is about social justice or racial justice, or in this case, I guess, health justice. But that's not true. That's all window dressing. What's true is they choose enemy demographics, classes, groups that they have decided to designate for resentment. And they will say this group of people is responsible for all of the ills of society, and if we can just get rid of them, we will achieve our utopia. And so to that group of people, any amount of persecution, any amount of injury, and even up to and including death is deprived of them because, and this is where we get the title of the book, Unhumans, because they view their victims as less than human. They view their victims as people who do not deserve human rights. The first thing the communist does is strip you of your human rights. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, property, those are all thrown out the window. They take away your right to life, they take away your right to liberty, they take away your right to, of course, property. In China, so I'm a Mandarin speaker, but the translation, of course, of communism in Mandarin, I've always thought it's better than our word of it in English, because they call it 共产主义. So the ideology of public or collective ownership.
Yeah.
The ideology of collective ownership. It's perfect. Abolish public or private property, only have public property. This is the essence of really all communism. And so the reason that you see the support, so much support throughout America today of the murder of Brian Thompson, the CEO, is because this is a revolutionary ideology that has designated white, male, affluent businessmen as a criminal class.
You're bringing up a really important point, because a lot of these things started with, anti-discrimination,
Yes.
anti-racism. It goes under the veil of compassion.
Right.
People think they're being kind. They don't want to make enemies.
Right, so it short circuits your normal critical reasoning, or it short circuits your pathway. Because if I come out and tell you, oh yeah, we're going to get rid of all the white males in society, it's like, well, that's pretty wild. That's that we can't do that. But if you say, did you know that this group has been discriminated against and we need to rework society in order to help this group, and another group was discriminating against them in the past, and in order to right the wrongs of the past, they always love that phrase, right the wrongs of the past, we need to set new. First, it starts out with hiring. It starts out with college acceptance and acceptance rates, and then they just move the chains further and further and further. And this has been a project that's gone on in the United States for about 50 years at this point, and it's now just reaching its final stage.
And I think you're making a very good connection here, because this is important to recognize. It started off with kindness and anti-discrimination. Now you have them openly praising murder,
right,
and openly calling for killing, and openly calling for more like it. We've gone from the idea of opposing violence and opposing discrimination to open endorsements for violence and calls for violence. And I mean, we're already at that stage.
So we talk about this on Unhumans, we talk about this in Bulletproof, how the far left has completely moved to the final stage of the project, where they do become radicalized and they now get their foot soldiers. And by the way, anyone who falls into this ideology, for example, Luigi Maggioni, coming from a family that is extremely affluent by any definition, privilege, the textbook, I think, definition of privilege, Ivy League educated, more wealthy, by the way, than the victim in the case, that it doesn't matter, because the victim was of the enemy class. The victim is of the oppressor class. And so he views himself, and his supporters view him, as the vanguard. This is Lenin's phrasing, and we explain this in Unhumans. They view him as the vanguard of the proletariat. So the vanguard of the proletariat is sort of the hero, the champion, the anti-racist hero who is fighting on behalf of those oppressed classes and demographics and individuals who just can't do it for themselves. And so they need the Luigi Maggionis of the world, and the Vladimir Lenins, and the Joseph Stalins, and the Nikita Khrushchev, and the Mao Zedongs, and the Zhou Enlais, and the Deng Xiaopings, and all the rest, to be able to, and the Pol Pots, to raise up and fight for them. And that is how they tell themselves that they are on the good side. And unfortunately, we see this, and in Unhumans, we document it out completely, that this ideology is alive and well here in the United States, and really throughout the West.